The ancient civilizations of Greece and Rome may both have ruled the Mediterranean region at one time or another, but their differences outweighed their commonalities. These differences include geography, governance, position of women in their respective societies, economic structure, and art. Just as we share a border with Mexico, our languages, history, and culture are vastly different. The same applies to ancient Greece and Rome. Though both were located in the northern Mediterranean, ancient Greece's cities were located primarily near bodies of water separated by hilly countryside, while ancient Rome was situated inland, primarily on the river Tiber. Though the cultural and geographical differences between the two civilizations are clear, both produced enduring influences on modern society. Let's explore some of these differences and see that ancient Mediterranean life was not all about government, togas, and gladiators. Ancient Rome changed politically 3 major times over their history. First was the Age of 7 Kings. During this time, kings ruled from the city of Rome, with a king named Romulus founding Rome in 753 BCE. The second political wave occurred around 509 BCE. This time was known as the Age of the Republic. Romans were tired of the kings ruling and had a swift uprising and then set up the new republic in which citizens chose their ruler. This style of governing ended around 44 BCE when Julius Caesar was murdered. A war of power began and ushered in the third political change. This time was known as the Age of Emperors. The first emperor took over in 27 BCE. Funny thing is, he was Julius Caesar's grandnephew and adopted son, Octavius. Talk about keeping it in the family. This new wave of emperors was much like the earlier Age of Kings, where the emperor had the right to decide everything, including who should live and who should die. The other political might of Rome was seen through its army. Rome became one of the most powerful ancient civilizations in large part because of its army. The army fought and conquered new lands, captured slaves for Rome, and kept the peace. Without the might of the Roman army, emperors would have struggled to maintain power. Many times, it was Roman generals that would become emperor. At one point, the army consisted of over 500,000 men. Service was mandatory in Rome and lasted anywhere from 20 to 25 years. The perk was compensation, or a slave could earn their freedom by serving in the army. Men that were citizens were the only ones entitled to vote, serve in the government, and the army. Meanwhile, in ancient Greece, the political world was a bit different. Ancient Greece was not seen as one unit, rather it was comprised of hundreds of city-states that centered on the principle of democracy. These city-states often fought each other, considering themselves to be an independent nation within Greece. The 2 main and most powerful city-states within Greece were Athens and Sparta. Athens was the largest city-state with the largest population. Democracy was highly valued. All citizens, with the exception of women, slaves, and children, could vote on how they wanted their society to be run, because the Greeks believed one person should not choose for all. The exception to Greece being fully democratic was the city-state of Sparta. In Sparta, the state was militaristic and run by their generals. This made Sparta the strongest city-state in all of Greece. Greece had a system of democracy where juries of peers were created in order to provide fair trials to citizens, much like modern-day United States. In ancient Greece, war gave men the chance to prove their bravery and serve their city. In most city-states, able-bodied males were expected to fight whenever war was waged over the latest threat. Sparta was the only city-state to have a permanent army. At age 7, boys left home to begin training to be some of the mightiest warriors. Once the age of 30 was reached, men were allowed to be full citizens. At age 60, if one survived that long, a Spartan male could retire from the military, and as compensation, was rewarded some land and slaves. Rome consisted of primarily 3 social groups. First were the patricians. They were the highest class in Rome. They often had a great deal of money, power, and held important jobs in the government and later in the church. The majority of this class consisted of emperors and senators. Second were the Aquites, or the middle class, consisting of rich businessmen, traders, bankers, and tax collectors. Third were the plebeians, or the lower class, consisting of farmers, craftspeople, and shop owners. These citizens did not have much power, but were still able to vote for their ruler. The middle and lower class supported most of Rome's economy. Romans used coins made of silver, bronze, and gold as currency, with the latest ruler on one side of the coin. At the bottom of the totem pole was the Roman slave. Slaves came from all across the empire and worked for Roman citizens. Slavery in ancient Rome was viewed as a natural way of life. In fact, according to some scholars, Rome had the largest number of slaves in human history. Slavery was estimated at anywhere from 25 to 40% of the Roman population. One estimate suggests that the slave population may have been as much as 300,000 to 350,000 of the 900,000 total inhabitants. At the center of every Roman family was the so-called man of the house. These men were called paterfamilias. The father ruled his family until he died. The father held a great deal of power over his children well into adulthood. Talk about helicopter parenting. Fathers often even decided if their infant was worthy enough to survive. Even after children were married off, the paterfamilias still ruled over them. The wife would run the household, but were not permitted to have jobs outside of the home in wealthy families. In the lowest class, women sometimes held jobs such as doctors or worked alongside their husbands. The Romans did, however, enjoy their fair share of fun. The government provided free entertainment to the public. They commissioned large coliseums to house over 50,000 people so they could enjoy gladiators fighting each other or some exotic animal like bears and lions. The Colosseum's floors could even be flooded to add a nautical theme to all the bloodshed. At the Circus Maximus, Romans could enjoy a chariot race, or one could attend the theater if they were looking for less gore to enjoy a good pantomime or play. Greek society was mainly broken up between free people and slaves, who were owned by the free people. In most Greek societies, men were in charge. Fathers made household rules in which all family members obeyed. Women were left to run the household on a daily basis. They oversaw children, slaves, meal preparation, and paid the bills. Most Greek men had confidence in their wives to fulfill these tasks. Outside of the home for women was different. Women were seen as second-class citizens and were required to have a male relative or servant accompany them out in public. In Sparta, the role of the female was a little different from the other city-states. Since the men were away to train or fight a majority of the time, Spartan women ran the households and enforced the rules. Spartan women were not restricted to their homes either, and they could be seen in public unaccompanied with no reprimand. The economy of Greece heavily relied on farming and trade jobs such as sailors, carpenters, and stonemasons. The currency used was a silver coin called the drachma. These coins were used in trade and to pay taxes to the city-state. Of course, when talking about everyday life of the ancient Greek, one must mention entertainment. The people of Athens and other city-states loved theater. The most famous ancient theater, the Dionysus, held thousands of people at once. Admission was free for the poor, but the rich had to pay a small fee to see a show. Then, of course, there was the love of sports. The Greeks felt physical fitness was important, so they opened the first form of gyms. They particularly loved athletic competition. This love for sports and competition developed into the creation of the Olympic Games. The first Olympics was held in 776 BCE, then every 4 years after that. Competitions included running, discus throw, javelin, wrestling, boxing, and chariot racing. The Olympic Games were so important to the Greeks that the warring city-states would seize and a peace truce called the Olympic Truce was made so that everyone could enjoy the games safely. With all this talk of fun and games, each ancient culture also had a love of religion even more at times. Religion in ancient Rome was highly valued. Before the rise of Christianity towards the end of the Roman Empire, Romans were polytheistic, meaning they worshipped several gods and goddesses. Within their belief system, every god and goddess had a specific role. For instance, Jupiter was the king of gods and Mars was the god of war. New gods and goddesses were added whenever new lands were conquered. As an example, when they conquered parts of Greece, they added Greek gods to their religion. Talk about inclusivity. Temples were built to house priests and to worship the gods. In Roman religion, sacrifices were often made. Some sacrifices included money, food, or other objects. Certain times of the year were considered holy days, and on these days, people did not work. Instead, special events such as games and shows were put on for the Roman citizen. Much like ancient Rome, ancient Greece was also polytheistic. In Greek life, all parts of life were used to please the gods, from the creation of the Olympics to art. Greeks created myths in order to understand the actions of the gods and how they controlled the world. The most powerful of the gods lived on Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece. All had certain powers and interests. Zeus, for example, was the god of the heavens and skies, and Athena was the goddess of warfare and wisdom. The Greeks built temples to worship their gods. Often, animal sacrifices were made to please the gods. It is evident that both the Greek and Roman societies valued their religion highly and incorporated it into everyday life. In ancient Rome, typically only the wealthy attended school. At age 7, boys would head off to school to learn to read and write in Latin and learn their Roman numerals on a piece of wood covered in wax using a stylus, an ancient form of the stylus pen we use today for modern technology. Those wanting to pursue government roles continued schooling later in life. The poor taught their children to read and write, and for the boys to hunt and fish, and for the girls, household jobs. Similarly, in ancient Greece, boys attended school at age 7 to learn reading, writing, poetry, and sports. At home, girls learned to run a household. Spartan girls were an exception, however. They were encouraged to be physically strong, so in addition to learning household duties, they trained by running, wrestling, and javelin throwing. Greeks also wrote on wax tablets using a stylus. In addition to schooling, the Greeks loved philosophy. Philosophy is the study of general and fundamental questions about existence, knowledge, values, reason, mind, and language. Some famous philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle probably would have never fathomed thousands of years later other civilizations would be reading their ideas and works. When it came to science and technology, the Romans may have had a slight lead compared to the Greeks. Many comforts we enjoy today are thanks to Roman technology. They invented aqueducts, the predecessor to indoor plumbing, and arches in buildings. They built over 55,000 miles of road, many of which are used today as modern updated roads. We can also enjoy indoor heating thanks to the Romans, who developed the method of heating their homes and floors. They developed hot and cold baths, and best of all, concrete. From Greece came many great scientists and inventors. Greek astronomers named the stars we see in our sky today. Many mathematical formulas used today were developed in ancient Greek days. Most notably for the Greeks was how they mastered medicine. They were very good at apothecary healing and for having one of the most famous doctors, Hippocrates. Sound familiar? Modern doctors take a Hippocratic oath, a promise to uphold the art of medicine and act in a patient's interests, an oath influenced by Hippocrates himself. Art and architecture were also highly valued in both societies. In ancient Rome, art was created to send messages to others or depict scenes of war, religious, or everyday life. Roman artists were best known for their portraits and sculptures. Roman artists often made individuals look better than they really did, much like we use filters or Photoshop to make our own physical appearances more attractive. Romans who had an abundance of wealth bought art for their homes and commissioned artists to lay intricate mosaic scenes in the floors of their homes. Roman architecture was also large and grand. To the Romans, bigger did mean better. They copied much of the Greek architecture by using columns, but what set them apart was their use of domes and arches within the structures. They used concrete to build most public buildings. Homes, however, were typically made of stone, plaster, and brick with tiled roofs. What the Greeks lacked in technological advances, they made up with their architecture and art. Greek art was made to tell the stories of Greek life. Legends were painted onto pottery and walls. Often, art and architecture collided. Most public buildings had tall columns with carvings called friezes. A good example of this is the famous Acropolis. They developed 3 styles of columns: Doric, Simple with pillow-like tops, Ionic, columns that featured scroll-like designs at the top and had a base, and Corinthian, the most ornate of columns that had leaves of the Acanthus plant. A good modern example of Corinthian columns is the columns that adorn our U.S. Supreme Court building. The Greeks also built a stadium in Olympia where the Olympics originated, and many large theaters and amphitheaters, and the first strip malls of ancient days called stoas. Greek homes were mainly built of mud and red clay with roof tiles. They were typically 2 stories high with rooms built around a small courtyard. Homes were more modest than most public buildings. The legacy these ancient civilizations had on modern society is grand. Ancient Greece left us with democracy, trial by jury, and philosophy, while Rome left us more technological legacies. Roman style of architecture is still used today, along with the invention of concrete. The Latin language is still used today and must be understood in order to read some of the most important ancient science and history texts. There is no denying ancient Greece and Rome shaped the world we live in today. Their power and beauty live on not only through remaining antiquities, but through the ideas and principles used by countless people in many nations around the world today.